Yeah, what's going on, y'all? You kicking it with the Junkyard Dog on junkyarddogs.com. We are back in full effect, you know what I mean? So check it out. Project Mayhem, we got the block. Everything has finally been done, you know what I'm saying? So we've got the parts ballast. We got the pistons, the rods pressed onto the pistons. Everything's been done. So we're actually finally ready to actually put this motor together. It's been about a year. I want to thank all y'all for being patient, you know what I'm saying? But hey, got to do it on your budget, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes, you know, it costs a little bit of money to get it done, but we're getting it done, you know what I mean? So, so the next step, we installed the cam a few months back, and then I covered it with a bag and then put it in the corner. So what we're looking at now is we're going to install the crank. So the first thing that you have to do when installing the crank in the 302 is you got to make sure that these holes here, these are oil galleys, right? These oil holes, you got to make sure that they're absolutely clean. There should be nothing in there. If there's something in there, you have to get it out, or you'll have oil pressure problems and you'll ruin the new bearings, and potentially your crank can have some catastrophic failure. So the first thing you want to do is you want to check in these holes. So basically what these are for is when your oil pump is pumping oil, it's pumping oil through these little holes, and it makes a slick layer between the crank and the bearing so that it can rotate smoothly. Okay? Now if there's something in there, it will not lubricate properly and it'll just burn the bearing up and you'll have a knocking motor in no time. Okay, so you got to make sure that these are clear. So whatever you got to do, maybe look down in there with a flashlight or whatever, make sure that they're absolutely clean. So the next thing you want to do, you want to make sure that you take the bearing with the slot in it. As you can see, that one goes at the base, and this slot is to allow the oil from this hole here to pass through onto the bearing surface and to the crank surface. Okay, the bearings that are on the top side look like this, so it's enclosed. So please guys, do not make that mistake. If you put these on the bottom, there will be no oil to your crank. It will destroy your motor in like a minute. All right, so you don't want to touch the surface with your fingers. If you want, put on gloves. Works a lot better. It's a lot easier, but I don't have any gloves right now, so I just try to make sure I don't touch the surface. All right, so these bearings, all bearings are going to have a little tang right here, as you can see. Okay, you see that little tang? See it? Okay, that goes into the groove here, and I'll show you a close-up of that. And that's to stop the bearing from spinning. All right, sometimes you hear guys say, "Oh, I got a spun bearing" or whatnot. So you'll see right here that there's a little divot right here for the tang to go into. So that's what you're going to install that tang into. All right, now the only bearing that's different from the rest of them is the number 3 bearing, and this is a bearing with a thrust surface here. This is to kind of gauge the front and back play of the crankshaft. Okay, so let's go ahead and press these in place. Be very careful. You slide the tang in the little groove. Okay, and just press down on the edge here. Okay, make sure it sits flush. Okay, that's it. You just have to make sure it sits flush. Try your best not to touch the bearing surfaces, because apparently the oils from our fingers break down the bearing surface a lot faster because our bodies are real acidic. The next thing after we install the main bearings, the lower main bearings on the block, is to check the crank. So what I did was I made sure I went in and took air and blew through each one of these holes just to make sure that they're clear and that they're free of any debris. So you're gonna blow air through it, and then you're gonna look, because like I said, any debris gets in there is gonna get in the oil and then ruin the bearing surfaces. Okay, so this crank has been cryo heat treated, which is basically cold forged, and then after that it was micro polished. Okay, so I had it turned before I did all that, 1010. So it's 10 thou undersize, and I bought the bearings to match that. Now what that means when I say 10 thou undersize is that on this crankshaft surface right here, it was 10 thousandths of an inch thicker. All right, and I had them take off a layer because there was damage and take it 10 thousandths thinner. All right, so when you do that, the bearings have to be 10 thousandths thicker to compensate for the thinner journals, which are these area right here on the crank. This is called a journal. So once we do that and everything checks out, you want to check the journals to make sure there's no nicks and everything. Just one final go over. And at this stage, we're going to put it in dry. Now, once you install it, do not rotate the crank. All right, so we're going to get ready to drop the crank in. I can't stress this enough. Man. You got to be super careful when dropping it in, okay? So we're gonna just take our time here, just rest it in place. Boom, there it is. Now, like I said before, do not rotate the crank. Leave it. Don't rotate it at all, just leave it as it is, okay? You take a piece of plastic gauge, it's like a thin piece of plastic, all right, and you cut it to length and you place it on the crank, okay? Just in the center, vertical, in a forward and backwards position, just like this, okay? Just rest it on the crank. Don't press it in or anything like that. Don't gotta go crazy with it. But you're gonna cut it just enough to go across the surface of the journal. You're gonna place it right in the middle, okay? This is what's going to be. So basically, to explain this in crude terms, you're measuring the clearance by the amount of squish. Squish meaning the how much the bearing actually presses onto the journal. So we're going to see the actual space in between. So there you have it. It's a piece of plastic gauge right there on the crank. Trying to your best not to disturb it. Like I said, do not rotate the crank when the bearings are dry. And what we're going to do now is take the main caps here, install the cap bearings, and then we're going to go ahead and put the caps on and torque it down to spec. All right, so the goal here, what we're trying to achieve, get the bearing here, okay? Get the cap, it's number 2 cap. Make sure you keep them in position because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's an arrow on them. Thank you, Ford, for that. To face forward to the front of the motor, which is right here. Okay, and you take the bearing, and they got that little groove right there. And boom. You stick it right in there, just like that. Okay, make sure it's flat. See, that side is up a little bit. See, it's not cool. So you just press on that side. There you go. And there it is. It's in there. Now what you're going to do, carefully without disturbing the plastic gauge, you're going to just rest it down in there. Now these caps have a little bit of an interference fit, so you just take a rubber mallet here. Now you're not going to pound on it. Okay, I'm just going to give it a light tap, and it's in there. Okay, you move on to all the rest of them, do the same. Then we'll install the bolts and the girdle at the same time, because we want to torque it down with the girdle, because that's how it's going to be torqued. So we want to make sure that we get a proper reading with the girdle. This is an engine girdle. This stops the caps from walking back and forth under high load. A great concept for supercharged motors, all right, which is what we're doing here. All right, so at this stage, when you see that all the caps are on and they have been tapped into place, we're going to take this main stud girdle. Like I said, this stops the caps that are very thin from walking back and forth. All right, now the studs that I have here all come with washers except for one. And the reason why one of them doesn't come with a washer is because of it actually holds the oil pump pickup in place. Now, no matter how long I've been doing this, I still refer to the manual to always be sure. You know, you don't want to like guess something like this. It's a very important stage in building a motor. Okay, so you're gonna see the crankshaft and connecting rods portion of your manual. This is a Fox body manual. I showed you guys when I picked this up sometime last year. So you're going to look for the torque specifications, as you can see here. And this is a block from a 96 Explorer. So we're going to say 87 on, and it's a two-step process. So it's 50 to 60 foot-pounds at first, and then you finish off with step 2, which is 75 to 85 foot-pounds. Okay, these are not ARP bolts or anything. If they were, ARP has their own torque specifications and their own torque setup, but these are not ARP bolts. These are bolts that just came with the girdle. Okay, so yeah. So what we're gonna do is first we're gonna do that, torque it down to 50 to 60. So I'd say right in between 55 foot-pounds, and then we'll finish it off right in between at 80. And when you're putting these bolts in, you want to make sure that there's oil on here. You don't want to put them in dry. When you put them in dry, it causes stress on the bolt, unnecessary stress, and it can actually cause them to potentially break. So that is something that's also mentioned in the manual as well. The plastic gauge underneath the surface here is going to squish down. Okay, so now that we torqued it down, give it a few minutes to let it settle, then take the bolts back off again and check the measurement. The way that you check the measurement, on the plastic gauge there is an indicator. You see these little spaces here? This tells you if you know the thickness of how much the plastic gauge got squished, and that'll tell you the measurement based on that. You're gonna see the bearing oil clearance here. So the clearance, as you can see, is 8 10,000ths to 1.5 thou. That's desired, but it's allowable to have 8 10,000ths to 2.6 thou. Okay, so 2 thou pretty much. I usually don't count the last number, but 2 thou. So it's really, really tight. So they don't want any slop in there, because if there's any slop, it's gonna just blow up on you like a grenade. So let's go ahead and remove the girdle and see what we got. All right. So you're gonna take these gauges and you're gonna measure and see which one it closely resembles, and then that's how you're gonna know what the clearance is. All right. So we're gonna do that to all the caps all the way across until we get a measurement that we're comfortable with. So it's crazy. We're coming in just at 2,000ths here. Just barely made it. It's a little. It's quite a bit on the loose side, but I think it's because I had the crank turn 1010, and then I had somebody else had cryo heat micro polish it on top of that, so it just brought it down even more. But we got lucky. We are just in spec. So with that being said, let's remove the plastic gauge off of the surfaces. I'm going to use like an old credit card or something and scrape that stuff off. Make sure none of the debris falls down in the motor, and then we'll move on to adding engine lube and the rear main seal. We took the crank out and broke it all the way back down again. Now that we know that we're in spec with the oil, let's go on ahead and put some engine assembly lube. It's Permatex Ultra Slick. Shout out to the sponsor for this. Here's something that I feel is very important that we have to cover when it comes to adding a main girdle to your motor. A lot of motors won't have this issue because they're not going to have this main girdle, which gets in the way of a lot of things. But you do have to keep in mind that you still have to maintain the manufacturer's instructions when tightening the bolts down, and I'll explain why. when you tighten down anything metal to metal, you're gonna have the problem of warping. Okay, so if we were to, let's just say, tighten down the bolts on the outside of the crank first, and then moved in, which is totally opposite of what the manufacturer suggests, then you would have the crank kind of bowed like this, because it would tighten down the edges, and then kind of you'd be trying to pinch these ones in the middle down, so it would actually tighten like this. So under heavy load, it would actually crack. The crank will be subject to cracking. Okay. Now, when you have this situation, what you have to do is you take this oil pump pickup and you actually spin it to the side, tighten the middle ones down first anyways, then you do the 2, then you do 4, then you do 1, and then you do 5. Okay? After you do that, you're gonna go back and untighten just this one bolt here that holds the oil pump pickup, and then you spin the oil pump pickup back to the position it's supposed to be in, and then you retighten it again. So that's how you get that on. And the reason why you're going to do it that way is because, like I said, you want to get this down in its place and tighten in its place, so everybody else will tighten accordingly. So you want to do that in that sequence so that you don't get a warped crank. Okay, so that's your tightness sequence explained. One of the other questions that I get also as well is, how do you stop this from happening here? Okay, so you don't want any metal to metal rubbing, so we're gonna actually have to remove this oil pump once again and grind down on the pump a little bit, because we don't want that to happen, because once we start to getting some motion going, it's actually gonna rub down on it and cause some metal shavings in the oil. We don't want that. Okay, also too, the tightening sequence for the for this gasket here, it's supposed to be 25 foot-pounds. Now, you gotta wonder, how do you get 25 foot-pound torque with it being such a small space? Needless to say, it's very difficult. You have to have a very small torque wrench, or I use the old school method where I use the amount of rotation to make sure that they're the same torque. So you bring it down till it's snug on both sides. There's a bolt here and there's one on the other side. Bring it down snug, and then I did a quarter turn, and then a quarter turn, and then I did another quarter turn, bam, and then did another quarter turn. So that is my method. But like I said, we have an issue here because this is rubbing, and we can't have that. So we're gonna have to remove this oil pump once again, and grind down on the pump a little bit right there so we can get some clearance. So what we're gonna do right now is just mark it and use that as our guide as to how we're gonna grind it down. So the last thing that we gotta pay attention to here would be the seal, okay? A lot of people would say, oh, you can put the seal on before the crank goes in. Here's the problem. If this seal is already in and you have the top side open as you bolt this down, this cap down, the problem is it'll tend to squish it and make it into an oval, and you don't want that to happen. It's going to start leaking. Okay, so basically what you want to do, this is a one-piece seal, which is a great idea. I'm glad that Ford decided to do this later in the 5.0 or the 302's life, because it stops a lot of leaks and a lot of problems. So what you want to do, I'm going to use some Permatex Ultra Slick once again, and use it on the inside portion. So put a little on my finger here, and you're going to use it on the inside portion of the seal. Get it nice and slick. This is to stop the seal from tearing as you install it. Okay. Second, so after you put your assembly lube on the inside here to kind of slick it up a little bit, so it goes over this surface of the crank. So you got to make sure that this surface is really smooth. Mine's was micro polished, so I know it's smooth as butter. I also put dabs of grease in the this part of the seal here to keep the spring in place. Last thing you want to do is you want to smear some oil, some engine oil, all around the edge of the seal here. Okay, just just like that, so it gets into place. Okay, there. So you're gonna take this part of the seal here and face it towards the motor. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and slowly bring it in here. Once you get it to that point, you're gonna take a mallet and a punch and just lightly tap it. Don't hammer away at it, but just lightly tap it. It might be a little difficult because we can't tap it at the bottom like we want to, but you want to push the bottom in first. I'm gonna sneak the punch through the engine stand here. Give it a few little love taps at the bottom here. It's gonna hear like a more dead, flat sound once it bottoms out. You don't want to keep hammering on it because then it'll start to bend the seal all up and then you get a leak. Okay, that's the thing. You just want to gently tap it in. Once you feel like you got to start hammering on it, then you're gonna have a problem. Okay. Yeah, we're in there. Boom. So the seal has been installed. No dings, no dents, none of that. It's got to be very careful with that, because this is one of the most irritating things to go bad on a motor. Once it goes bad, it causes a huge bunch of oil, gunk all over the bottom of the motor. Actually, Project Mayhem, the motor that was in it before, actually had this issue, and it made a mess. There was just stuff everywhere, oil everywhere. So, yeah, there it is. So let's go on ahead and move on to checking the crank's rotation. So yeah, now we got the crank in there. Now once you have it at this stage, you're just gonna go on ahead and rotate it. Make sure it's spinning freely. Just check everything. Okay, good. We don't have any problems here so far. So the one thing now you have to check is end play. So basically end play is how much the crank moves front and back, okay? Because it's got to have a little bit of give front and back as it's operating. You know, can't be too tight or it'll just bind up. So the trick about doing that is you need a dial indicator with either a magnetic stand or I have a different type, but it also works. And you put the dial indicator on the tip here and measure the end play. So the crankshaft end play here is 4 thousandths to 8 thousandths. Okay, maximum 12 thou. So okay, so now we're at the stage we're going to measure the crankshaft end play. So all you're going to need for this is a mallet, a breaker bar or a crowbar of some sort, or pry bar, and a dial indicator and a magnetic stand. Okay, to check the end play. Like we checked in the manual, end play should be 4 to 8 thou. So what you're gonna do is take the mallet, you're gonna hit the crank a couple times. You make sure it's seated all the way backwards. Okay. Next thing we're gonna do is set up the magnetic dial indicator so that the tip here is on the edge of the crankshaft. Then you're going to set the dial indicator to 0. Boom. So now that you got your dial indicator set up, and you got it on 0, and you make sure that it's on 0, okay, you're going to take the pry bar, and you're going to gently put it between one of the mains and the crank, and pry it forward. Let's see what measurement you get. It's right at 4 thou. So we got 4 thousandths end play. So we're in spec. We're just in spec because it's a brand new bearing. So of course it's going to be very tight. Once we start it up, it's going to wear down over time. But it's actually very good to start at 4 thou because if it's too much slop back and forth, you're going to have some issues. All right, so let's move on. There it is. The crank is now installed on Project Mayhem. So in the next episode, we're going to deal with the pistons and rods. Let's go, Junkyard Doggin!